Communities. My name is Devin Cornea. I'm with NOFA New Jersey, chipping in here with nofamass. Let's see. We want to take a moment and acknowledge the land that we're working on, speaking on. To learn more about the land that you're working on at your farm, in your home, wherever you do business, visit native-land.ca. I'll also be dropping links into the chat throughout this session so that you can find the land that you are currently located on. In an agricultural system built on stolen land and the forced labor and exploitation of Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, this conference aims to center equity in the food system. There is a list of awesome food justice organizations that are working to increase equity throughout the food system. Feel free to check these out on your leisure. Feel free to add more in the chat if you're joining us online. We want to take a moment to thank our sponsors for helping make all this possible. Stonyfield Organic is our partner level sponsor, contributing greatly to this conference. We also have various other sponsors. We love them all. If you're shopping, please support them when you can, if you can. And our supporter level sponsors, a wide network of support throughout the country for NOFA. NOFA is hiring. Seems like the workforce is growing all the time now with more interest in local organic and regenerative agricultures. They have current openings for conference coordinators, administrative directors, assistant development director, technical assistance positions associated with some of the grant and cooperative agreement projects that are going on. If you're interested, go to nofamass.org/jobs. And I will move on and introduce today's presenter. So Carl Davis, owner of Oak Hollow Livestock Farm, has worked in agriculture his whole life, and now he's occupied with assisting farms becoming a little more regenerative, a little more biological, instead of, relying on chemicals and intensive inputs. So Carl, I'll welcome you on up. I'm going to go ahead and start your presentation. Bear with me here while we get things going. Share.
Recording in progress.
And we will. All right. Does that look good for you?
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Carl.
Arrows just make it go. Let's see. Hold on just a second. Good morning, everyone. How y'all doing? So, like I said, I'm Carl Davis. I'm owner with my wife, Oak Hollow Livestock. I've got a lot of experience from childhood on a dairy farm, and then mixed crops and aquaculture as far as that goes. And not that I'm much of an expert on that end of things, but I enjoy it. I worked in, basically in agway when I was a teenager. I don't know if you know what agway is. I don't know if that existed for all you guys, but livestock feed and fertilizer and what have you. That's where I kind of got my introduction to, I guess, what is now termed regenerative agriculture through a woman, ML Altabelli. Some of you may or may not know her. She has presented here before. And she now owns the agway that I used to work at in Gardner, Massachusetts. It's now the Good Earth, I believe she calls it. And then I worked on my own farm. We have our own farm. We raise meat goats and pigs and dairy goats and poultry, and kind of the list goes on. We have llamas, for the heck of it. So, a fair amount of, a good amount of experience with livestock. And then I worked at we raised perennial ornamentals, daylilies, hosta. The list goes on. We raised, I think there was 50 or 60 different varieties, something like that. What was unique about that was we had a greenhouse where we did, Sorry, I keep on forgetting there's a camera here, so I'm going to try to keep on looking back and forth because you guys are here, but we have folks online. Unique about it, we had the greenhouse that did both propagation as well as growing out liners, trays. And what I did more of was the field end of things, where we grew field grown perennials for bare root sale to wholesale producers. We were wholesale producers selling to other greenhouses that potted them up, basically. I don't know if anybody's familiar with some of the local ones like Pride's Corner or Cavicchio's. I don't think who else is around. King Farm, and then we also shipped across the country and into Canada. So we ship both liners as well as bare root production. And so I was the field manager there. And he said, I no longer work there. I work, I'm trying to get other people into this, because once we transitioned, it's a kind of an exciting new world to get, and trying to spread regenerative agriculture. So on that point, I'm talking about more regenerative agriculture, not so much specifically organic. This all can go to organic, but my goal is to have people less dependent on using chemical inputs. And that includes both chemicals, things such as fungicides, herbicides, as well as chemical fertilizers. I know for some people, this is obviously a different crowd, being, Northeast organic farmers, but I know a lot of people are still very much chemical. I'm in the Pioneer Valley area, so, the potato farms and the corn farms, many of them are not organic and aren't anywhere near that sort of situation. So my goal is to try to spread the word and hopefully get more people thinking about what they're inputting and where those inputs are going, for one, and not going specifically to the plants. So at that, I will carry on. This presentation is going to be showing a lot about what we did to transition from a very chemical system to a more regenerative system. It's not organic. It's not, it may never be organic, but at least it can, decrease the dependence on chemicals. And, yeah, that's huge. So quickly, the first thing I'd like to do, I have kind of a weird picture there that came up weird, but you can see that looks pretty weird on the screen up there and here. But I'm going to quickly run through what the business is and what we were doing to try to then head us into what we changed and how it worked out. So this is a giant cooler in the back, and in the red building is what was called the cutting barn. We sold these bare root, and we divided them. Everybody familiar with probably like a daylily. You get one and they just keep on kind of getting bigger, you get different fans. So we would sell, one fan, a 2 to 3, a 4 to 5, 5+ fans for people to pot up and sell. That's what's happening here. That's the cooler. And this is the cutting room. You dump, your plants into the left-hand side, go down the conveyor. People would be standing there, dividing all of the plants up to what sizes they needed and crated and so on. Kind of an odd picture because it didn't fill, but this is where we were growing. The little oxbow you can see on the top is the Deerfield River. So we were growing right on the Deerfield River. We were fortunate enough because we can irrigate from the Deerfield River, but also unfortunate enough when the hurricanes came through, was that 2011? Our fields were underwater. The far right-hand corner. But basically, instead of making the turn, it kept on coming. So it was a mess. And it's also part of the reason why some of those fields got me thinking towards regenerative, because one that's marked 13 is very sandy now. This is the greenhouse facility. It's actually the second greenhouse facility since I had been there. The original one they sold for marijuana production, and then we rebuilt this whole greenhouse in a spring. We went from a 3-acre to a 2-acre greenhouse that we built in a spring, which was pretty wild.
Very briefly, sorry. Sorry, folks. One moment as we work through some tech issues.
Yeah, just trying to make sure the people in Zoom can
Oh,
see
sorry.
our PowerPoint too. Yeah, for your window.
This still isn't.
Is there someone that's monitoring chat and so on? Because I'm definitely not looking at it. Okay,
We're
cool,
watching.
'cause-
We're watching the chat for you. Yeah. Sorry, first presentation of the day.
Is this
it's
better?
all good.
Can you advance? No, so I think what we should do is exit the presenter view. I think we're going to present just from this view and push the slides down. Yeah, so if you just maximize this.
Here you do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Brian.
You keep on talking. With the greenhouses, it's
Just this.
maybe I should, because Zoom may not be
Okay.
seeing it. Oh, hold on.
Yeah.
Perfect. Cool. So
You good to go?
yeah, you can manually advance if you'd like. Would you like me to advance it for you while you speak?
No,
Okay.
I'll keep on walking back and forth. I got to try to
Yeah.
remember there's a camera here
So
too.
no Zoom can see it too.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
No problem. So we're good.
Yep. Good.
All right, so that's the part of the greenhouse facility. Okay, those inside the greenhouse, to give you an idea, a lot of plants, smallish plugs, a lot of technology with far as, vents opening automatically and different misting systems, and you can't really see it very well, but on to the right side of the screen, there's part of the propagation bay, which had a lot more stuff going on with as far as misting, keeping the moisture really high in the air because we were taking cuttings and basically they had no roots. So you're rooting them. So they have no way of absorbing water through the roots because they have none. So you got to keep it really high moisture. And there's testing going on, and the ones you can see in the foreground are like different test plants. They're in bigger pots as far as to see. It's ornamental, so you're trying to find something that's aesthetically pleasing to people. So you got to go through many different plants and trying to find the new thing. And that was one of the kind of stressful things, was always trying to find the new thing, because they would plant them here, but I'd also have them in the field. And I'd have to be, okay, we got to take care of these ones because these are, special plant. But however, showing, different booms for either irrigating or different applications of whatevers. And then to move it onto the field, obviously part of a good regenerative system is not tilling or less tilling. We were raising a root crop, which poses a pretty big problem with that. We needed to dig them up. But in bed prep, we used a bunch of different tilling machines. So that's just, part of a frame of reference for what I ended up doing for transitioning to regenerative. More tillage machines, mowers. You can see, in the background that, the different plants. More tilling machines. This was, of course, is a tilling machine, but it is also was a method of getting away from using so many herbicides. So this is a, weeded between the, I guess to set you up as a 6-foot bed, and it weeded. We had 6 in a bed, 6 rows in a bed of plants. So this, hoed between them, and then the finger weeders basically weeded right along the plants. And that was part of our weed strategy, which previous to that was pre-emergent herbicides. So to me, this is obviously a better method than herbicides. Same sort of idea is called a tine weeder. I don't know if anybody's familiar, but it basically has a bunch of fingers that crawl along behind it. And amazingly enough, if your plants are rooted, it doesn't rip them up. But if you got to do it at the right stage with the weeds, if they're small, it pulls the weeds out. So again, another method of getting away from chemicals. Fortunately, we had the finances to be able to afford some of these equipment, because they're not cheap, but they last. But this was a compost turner. I guess I put it in there to remind myself to talk about compost, but we had done compost turning at one point, making our own compost. It was took a lot of time, and you needed the inputs. We had a lot of like peat moss and greens, but we didn't have really enough nitrogen to balance it. We had a lot of carbon. So that became didn't really work out for us, but we built that machine, so that's pretty cool. So tractors, of course, this was to give you a frame of reference. When I started, it's 24 acres roughly of perennials. When I left, it was about 40. So we used a lot of tractors. Obviously, those weeders needed something to pull them. This was a new one at GPS, which was a whole nother fun thing. Electronics and farmers don't always mix. On the back, though, is a bed shaper, which was pretty exciting because, shape their beds after you till them, but it also, you see the tank, as it shaped the beds, it was inoculating the beds as well with mycorrhizae, just to put it generically until we get there. This is our planter, followed by GPS. Basically, you had 6 beds, you have 6 people in there planting plants all day long. We would do anywhere from 40 to 60,000 plants in a day. And it'd take us months to plant. We had usually around 3 million plants in the ground, something in that range. So this is a lead-in, but this is a dip tank. We planted both plugs as well as bare root. The dip tank, we would dip our bare root into this tank. Originally, when I started, they dipped a Clary's, which is a fungicide. Obviously not what, we ended up doing on this presentation. So we'll get there as well. So this is an example of something we may have been planting. This is a Pemmican daylily. And this is digging. So this is, non-tillage. We tilled. We were digging into the ground, digging up bare root. So, part of the system that I had to design was based around we're digging. There's no way around it, at least that I'm not aware of. Trying to pull all those plants out of the ground. The cool thing though about this picture is they're digging, but there's also unfortunately, where the blue tractor is driving over, that's all cover crop. So we had gotten to the point where we were digging and then cover cropping, and we would be digging all season long. So we'd dig a row, we'd plant the row back into the cover crop. So that was pretty cool, and that was something that I was really happy we got towards. You can see it a little bit better there as far as the cover crop, and there's the digger can. And this is a little bit of my pride and joy. I'm a firefighter. I'm a volunteer firefighter. This is a fire truck. It's a 1984 Ford KME 1250 gallon per minute fire truck, and we irrigated with this. This, you have the one line that's going down into the river. It actually goes under the road. There's Mill Village Road there, and it goes under the road to the Deerfield River, and the other one is going into the underground hydrant system. And we irrigated with a fire truck, and that was, I don't know, probably half the reason I took the job. No, just kidding. But I enjoy fire trucks. Yeah, the NRCS gentleman that came out had never seen it before either. It was amazingly efficient. The great thing about a fire truck is the height from the truck to the river was about 22 feet. Most irrigation pumps lift about half that. Fire trucks lift 26. Didn't need 2 pumps. Previously they had a pump above the river pumping to another pump that pumped into the system. This guy gets it done with one truck, and only about 50 gallons of diesel a day when you're running it for 12 to 14 hours. Obviously, this year they're probably not running it very much, unless they're just sucking it out of the field. I don't know. So pictures of irrigation, idea of the plants. These are all daylilies. These are happy returns. That's for anybody that doesn't know, that's a reel. It's basically pulling in a Hart's discharge line to a boom. Same idea as like a pivot, if anybody's familiar with that, except it's coming straight in, it's linear. And pipe irrigation, a lot of people are familiar with that, sprinkler heads. This is one of the booms. The old girl, she's an older unit. And the sprayer. So, of course, the sprayer for the first part of its life was chemicals. The good and the bad thing about that is we were applying a fair amount of chemicals and a fair amount of foliar fertilizers that were chemical based previous to this change. I'd be spraying 4 or 5 times a week, which can be beneficial when you're in a very sandy soil with a low organic matter. Some of our soils had 0.5%, basically sand. So irrigation obviously was a constant thing, and applying a fertilizer, like a slow release fertilizer, sort of set it and forget it. Well, it was gone in less than 2 weeks because it was sand. Slow release chemical fertilizers work upon heat and moisture. Well, if it was hot and we're always irrigating, that meant they were gone. So we'd have a flush, and then we're like, nothing's growing. They had no fertilizer, better for worse, as far as the chemical base. So we got into, fertilizing once or twice a week, depending, with a foliar, chemical based. That leads into, what I was able to do as far as, using biologicals. And that's just kind of some of the soil previous. I don't, obviously it's heavy soil, it's cracked. Some of the joy of it is we had everything from that very sandy soil I was talking about, but we also had a field that was kind of far flung that was basically growing in a clay pot. And that would talk about something that cracked when it dried up. And that was, so my little joke, maybe we should till it again. Obviously tilling, you just keep on breaking up the, lost the word, but the structure basically, and collapses. And when it dries out, you have plates. So a bit about, our first step into it was cover crops, into regenerative. So this is, part of the transition. Previously, we had been using a lot of grass crops as cover crops because they were easy to manage. You can mow them pretty easy. As well as we had issues with like root knot nematodes and things like our hostas, and we would keep it in cover for 2 years. And this is something that was happening previous to me going there. So, I would say that, the people I was growing for were sort of advanced in that right. Many people don't, or they cover crop for the winter and they go back into it. They were cover crop for 2 years, but they were mostly using a grass species, which of course doesn't really build your soil up, but it's easy to maintain, and the nematodes couldn't feed on it, so that helped. So there was a lot of thought in it, is I guess my point. So working for people that were very thoughtful as far as that goes. So that also made my trying to transition very much easier. So pictures, cover crops starting to come up. All sorts of stuff in there. That was the goal, moving it, we had also tried like peas, oats, and radish maybe, or maybe it was just peas and oats. And we had also tried some oats, which were kind of cool. If anybody knows about oats, they're a disease suppressing. So basically they oxidize the soil, like, isn't that right? Make it oxidized, so that I always mix that up. But anyway, it's a disease suppressing, and it's amazing how much difference if you just put it a pure oat down in an area where you've had we were trying to do multiple things, radishes in there, trying to loosen up some of the soil, all sorts of stuff. It was a mix, at any rate. This is just them seeding. That's a seeder on the back. It's a slice intraseeder. Sorry, intraseeder. I think we refer to it as. So we were interseeding as we were harvesting through the season because we'd be shipping daylilies all season, basically from the end of July, middle of July through, and it just kept on going. We would only have like June into July, we wouldn't really be shipping. We'd be trying to finish planting. So we were interseeding as we dug, which is awesome. Less weeds, if you want to call them that, less plants of, not desired plants, I suppose. They're not really, I take exception at the term weeds, but that's an easy word to use. So we were seeding a nice cover crop field. This is a reminder because cover crops, many people plant them, it's easy bake oven, set it and forget it. Cover crop field, if you treat them like your crops, you get a lot better results. And not only does that results for the cover crops, but for the next, the next crops coming up, whether we're in a 2-year cycle like us, where we would have 2 years of cover crops, or you were headed into your cash crop. So that, sorry, got distracted. So this is a cover crop that I managed to irrigate at the right time before it got coming up, because once it came up, I didn't want to drive over it. And the only way I had to irrigate it was one of those booms. And we fertilized it with Pro Start. I don't know if you're familiar with North Country Organics. They're in Vermont. Pro Start we use because a lot of things just don't need the nitrogen. Perennials typically really don't need the nitrogen. So we fertilize this and irrigate it at the right time. And this got bigger and bigger. This was a really nice stand. But once we were able to do those things, it was kind of set and forget it because it got into the ground, all the different root levels for all the different crops, it just took off. This is Sudan grass. We had planted this in a field, we were going to mow it. We got kind of sidetracked and it was this tall when we went to mow it. That was not particularly easy to mow, but it came up really nice, and it was amazing how much material is there. It's an awesome crop. It's pretty. It looks like corn, but yeah. So a few pictures about how the crop looked previous to kind of transitioning. This is all sedum. All different things here, some phlox and Achillea. However, it was very colorful. It was beautiful to work there. People would drive down the road and stop all the time, of course, to take pictures because you get pictures like that, nice rainbow over the field. Peonies, more phlox. So I'm just kind of quickly go through these, give you an idea. Okay, this is a good one. Sedum, give you an idea of the root mass. This is previous to, working towards regenerative. Idea of the root mass, and you can't really specifically see the roots, but it gives you an idea how big that root mass is. And this would be probably late summer, give or take, middle to end of August. More pictures of kind of a root mass. Also noting the root mass versus the green mass on top. My theory on that is we were using a lot of nitrogen. So you would get a lot of green. There wasn't necessarily a lot underneath, but we were irrigating enough so that, it didn't die, basically. If you were, I think of people's lawns, people spread out high nitrogen, you get a drought and their lawns turn brown really quick because they got a lot of green, not a lot of root, like a golf course. My pastures don't do that. We've got a lot of material there as a base because, we're grazing it, we're rotationally grazing it, things like that. So my thought on this is a lot of nitrogen, a lot of fertilizer, and fortunately enough, irrigation to keep them doing okay. This is a stilby, just giving you an idea of what the soil looked like, and you can see kind of almost the capping on the soil. Pictures of roots on a sedum, give you an idea of size. Again, more root pictures. And some of this, again, the different kind of sedum, but, pictures of capping on the soil. One of the few pictures I had of the liner trays showing, if you get really robust root systems, they write out the holes on the bottom. I don't know how many people grow with, trays, but it gives you an idea of what they look like. Idea on, a little gold star and, just how they looked. And, aphids. I don't know if you can see them, but there's aphids on that. Small, a relatively small root matter. Same. I kind of like this quote, and it also gave me a marker so I knew where the pictures changed. If you want to make small changes, change how you do things. When you want to make major changes, change how you see things. I found that kind of helpful because it changed, my point of view from kill, or how do I kill this, to, how do I support life? How do I make it so that, the bad guys, quote unquote, don't want to be here? Or how do I introduce good guys that will take care of the problems so that I'm not spraying chemicals? Different, I guess the big point of view was, from killing to supporting life, I guess, is these are some of the products that I'll be showing. This is some of the stuff that we used in our transition. I know there's, KNF, Korean National Farming, and all different ways of either coming up with your own inoculants. There's all different companies that'll sell you something. My preference for Tineo. Dennis and Steve there were really helpful in formulating how to go about transitioning. And for my 2 cents, their products work. I know some products don't really. So these are, I guess this would be relatively early season, but the greenhouse went year round. It slowed down quite a bit in the winter. These are heuchera. And you can see all of the mycelium if you look. You can see the main white root that's coming down. If you look, there is, it's not very clear here. There's just a lot of fuzz. That's not the plant's root, that's mycelium. And you can see that's nice and white. A big problem with a lot of the greenhouse grown is they'll get too much water and the roots will be brown, basically kind of dying. More pictures, more heuchera, just great looking roots, white, And you can, I can see it better on mine, but there's just a lot of mycelium. Maybe that one's clearer. You see the mycelium, but just the sheer amount of root mass, is unlike what we previously had. And field grown. So that, I guess I should give a preface. This was 2021, which was maybe not quite as wet as this season, but it was wet. I didn't have to irrigate any of July, most of August. Obviously, a lot of concerns about, just plain flooding, like this year, but, it being humid and having a lot, concern about fungus. But this is the bleeding heart, I guess. And they're notoriously, well, for one, they don't want to be in the sun. But they're also notorious as far as wanting, not to have their feet wet. And it was a very wet year. And these roots look awesome. I may be a little biased. I grew them, but I think they look great. More pictures of it. Dicentra tend to have a big chunk of a root and then some stuff coming off. And when you dig them, you tend to take off the smaller roots. But moving into something like this is Rudbeckia, Black Eye Susan, I guess is a common name. But this is ornamental, so they developed it to be short. But the root mass is there. Be more pictures. It's in a stilby. We had a lot of issues with rhizoctonia and the roots just rotting off. Those roots aren't rotting off. So, this is after transitioning. After I get through the pictures, we'll talk about what exactly we did. Wonder how well that came up. Can you guys see all the little nodules? And it's all mycorrhizae coming. And this is off of a plant that was only, it got planted as a plug. So it was, already a plant. It wasn't like a bare root. We did a lot of stuff from bare root and we did a lot of stuff from plugs. But this came out of a plug that was, yay big. And this is about 3 weeks later, three to 4 weeks, give or take, in that time zone. After going from this to, this is a lavender. Same deal as from a plug. And this is, you can see at the top, they were grown in like a cocoon type bedding. You can see on the top, this is all the root mass within about a month. Not what we were seeing previous. This is the Rudbeckia again. You can see kind of the mass of, trying to dig one plant up, the mass of root. And that's flipping it over. Again, this is in about a month from planting of a plug. You can see all the white roots. You can just see the mass of it. That's my hand. I'm not huge, but I'm not that small. And that's from a plug to that in about a month. Just very vigorous. And we also pre-inoculated them in the greenhouse. So that is, key. But we were inoculating them in the field. Say more pictures, I guess me bragging a little bit about how well they came along. The same thing. These are only for about 3 weeks old. You can see the kind of the yellow roots that are on it, but then you can see all the white roots that are coming. These daylilies were notorious. We actually shipped them in from Costa Rica, and they were notorious for, unfortunately, cutting them too low. So they would actually kind of take part of the crown. But this guy's starting to take off despite. So I was very happy with that. Same thing. Here's another one. Look how small that is. This is about two-ish weeks after planting. And you can see that white root that's just whoosh, coming out. Same thing, Astilbe, shook it out a little bit to see the root mass. Astilbe are just notorious for root diseases. More Astilbe, Achillea, just give you a breadth of, what we raised. This is a phlox, same deal from a plug. And that root mass that's coming off it is crazy. Okay, so that's enough of the bragging. So it's moving into some of the ideas behind and actually pre-planning, and then kind of what we did in season. So pre-planning, there was a lot of discussion with a lot of folks in the industry, not specifically ornamental perennial, but growing. I don't want to say a plant is a plant is a plant, but there's obviously a lot of mixes between them, and also thinking about the spectrum from being an annual plant to a perennial plant, thinking about perennial like headed right to trees as far as that goes. Thinking about what the fungal bacterial ratios are. Things like your pigweed, your Gallensoga are way over here, are very annual, and also non mycorrhizal. They're not looking for anybody. They're just there. They're producing a load of seeds. It's like Gallensoga. It's like as soon as it's up, it's already made 10,000 seeds, and here we go. You want to pull me up? I'll just root from every which way. They're just looking to cover the soil. And, when you see that, it's sort of like, okay, what's going on that, like a bare soil is usually what's going on. I've got a lot of tillage, things like that. And then, I'm growing perennials. So, I was at the other end trying to have very fungally dominated soil, and I had bacterial dominated soil, because I had Gallensoga, I had the pigweed, so it's a lot of, there was a lot of tillage. So we had to work through that. And unfortunately, it's not like I could say, no, we're just not going to till. Well, we still had to dig the roots up, unless somebody comes up with an awesome idea to extract roots without digging. I don't know what else to do. Maybe there'll be a technology someday. I think about that for all the potato diggers, all the potato guys. A lot of potato guys in Deerfield is where we were, but in the valley. And what are you going to do? You got to get the potatoes out of the ground. So you got to work within. You got to think about what you're doing so you can work within your parameters. If you're going to dig, you need to do something to mediate that. If you're going to cultivate, you got to do something to mediate that. If you're still going to use some chemicals because we haven't figured out a better way yet, you got to mediate that. So that's where, this is maybe a little bit of a jump ahead. That's where we got, the initial is coming up with a plan. It's really scary to go from very conventional, not even to organic, to something more regenerative. Many of these products aren't organic, but they're not glyphosate. They're not fusilade. They're not, I could list you a lot of chemicals that I wish I had never handled. But some are still being used, and there's some ways to help mediate it and make it better. Yeah, this isn't going to happen, for people that are transitioning, this isn't going to happen overnight. We made a huge step, and even our technical advisors were very scared. They were afraid this was going to go to hell in a handbasket, basically. So this was crazy, and it was awesome, and it worked ultimately, even on a really wet year that we had that year, for the big transition year. So our first step was research. I didn't say, hey, we're planting tomorrow. Let's change this all. We're going to do this instead. I don't think the owner would have gone for that. We would have 3 million plants at about, even at $1 a piece, that's a lot of money. And they were more than $1 a piece. So, that was a lot of money. So research, look what products are out there. There are a lot of ways you can make this stuff work with homemade products, different composts, different inoculants. I didn't have the benefit of time or the comfort trying to do that. So we came up with a program that used products that were accessible, some which were organic, some aren't. But there are probably facsimiles to those products that weren't organic or are organic. So if people are certified, should be able to find that. So just as a rundown of these 3 slides with our plan that we were going to do that season. Nothing goes wrong, yada, yada, which it's agriculture. So it did go wrong, but it didn't flop. So just as a rundown, initial bed preps were, we used ProStart, North Country Organic product. We got like a tractor trailer load worth of stuff in for approximately 40 acres, 1,000 pounds an acre. We used gypsum, mostly for the sulfur, which is interesting because we were somewhat low sulfur. The good and bad of unsulfured gasoline, you don't have that sulfur coming out of the sky anymore. And lime, partially with the pH, which lime doesn't necessarily work great for pH, but mostly with the calcium. We didn't have very good levels of calcium in it. It showed. Then we had the dip tank that had shown earlier. We went from a fungicide to an inoculant Spectrum, which is, I don't know if anyone's familiar with the company Tineo. I think NOFA sells Tineo products in the spring sale. No, Micro 5000? It's a Tineo product. So I went to Tineo. I did a lot of research. The founder was a very interesting fellow. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us. It's been a while. But Steve and Dennis, the sales rep and the technical advisor, are just phenomenal. Phenomenal people. They helped us out so much. And they also sent me these for free, which was very nice of them. I didn't want to buy them. Fortunately, it's not a Micro 5000, but they've got the soil inoculants here. But Spectrum is one of the soil inoculants. It's mostly mycorrhizae with some bacteria. We can talk about as far as things, bugs in a jug versus harvesting your own. But this is what was tested, and I could stand behind and tell my bosses, yes, all these 3 million plants, I'm going to treat them like this now instead of what you've been doing all these years. So this was good. Pepsine G was a kind of an additive, just because coming off of a conventional system, Pepsine G was supposed to help mediate some of that. So that was the hope that, basically we'd have that in the fields, be putting that in the fields with some of the crops at least, to help not have so much interaction from the chemicals to our biology, because who really knows how long chemicals may last in the soil. And then humates, it's great for a lot of purposes, everything from chlorine water to, just like a mycorrhizae carbon source, just a ton of stuff. Humates is one thing that if anybody isn't using humates, I would suggest trying it. Then we do, a bed drench, like I'd shown you earlier with the tractor to bed row maker, and it was inoculating actually into the furrows that we were planting into specifically. Spectrum plus Myco, which was specifically a fungal, with Rejuvenate, which is an AEA product, Advancing Eco Agriculture. I don't know if anybody's familiar, like John Kemp and his work, but for my money, Rejuvenate is a crazy, makes things like just get growing as far your biology get growing. It's not so much for your plants. Then Humates, of course. And then the plugs, not only did they have a similar system previous, they were inoculating with all the spectrums and the Micro 5000 foliar spray, but specifically the plugs that were going to the field, I guess was about 800,000 that year. Before we're taking them to the field, we were drenching them with this Spectrum PSB, which is phosphorus solubilizing bacteria. See if I can get it all out. A fun thing with conventional agriculture, of course, is you tend to have a lot of phosphorus left in your soils. And, conventional wisdom is once it's there, so you add more phosphorus. There are ways. Phosphorus solubilizing bacteria is one of them. It's a nice product to be able to add. Of course, that can come along if you give it the right circumstances on its own. It's out there. It's just if you've been using conventional ag, you can kind of kickstart this whole system by adding. And then Humates as a buffer. Then the plan was, best laid plans, we would be doing basically a soil drench. It shouldn't always work as a drench. It usually worked as hey, it's going to rain, so I'm going to go spray this out and let it wash in because I don't have that much time. But we were adding bi-weekly Spectrum, a seaweed, and Humates. We needed to get that soil going. And then we had a special case with Dicentra, bleeding hearts. We would be using a lot more Myco because it's more fungally dominated inoculant. So that because they were, they needed it. They're a woods edge species, so they were really not bacterial. And they were very high value crops, so they got taken care of. And then we had a plan for putting down the PSB, the phosphorus solubilizing bacterium, as you can see there. The idea would be doing it the second week of July. That'd help get the phosphorus up, and that's ATP, that's energy, that's a bunch of stuff. Traditionally, which I don't know where our weather is going to go now. Obviously, we were just wet. Last year was dry. The year before was wet. It's like I don't know where. We're obviously all over the place, but we usually have this really Canada dry, and by supporting them with phosphorus solubilizing bacteria, the idea was they would come through that better because they'd have the energy. It seems like we got to support everything every which way now because the weather is crazy. That is really small on my screen. Is that big enough to see? Okay. This is a foliar spray, which we did weekly, which is going back to the fact that we were spraying so many times previous. I had the time to do all this. So it's kind of the idea of trying to work within what you're already doing so that you don't, most people don't have extra time. Do you have extra time? Anybody? Okay. So trying to work within the system you have. That you already have in place, rather. So fortunately, I was already doing all these sprays. Now, instead of doing whatever chemical spray or chemical fertilizer spray, I could do something that was biological. I was going to say beneficial, which that's all on how you view it. So we were doing weekly and after a stress event, which I want to stress the stress event. So we were still using herbicides once a month. We didn't actually have to use fungicide till the fall. We ended up with some powdery mildew, but we were still using some chemicals. Owner wasn't comfortable with swapping. I was very nervous about this whole situation because I opened my mouth about it and I was the one that was spearheading it for both the greenhouse and the field. So talk about many millions of dollars. I wasn't comfortable. You've got to work within your level of comfort, but we would follow up every one of these stress events, which can also include the weather, dries, wets, with applying Micro 5000, the Spectrum, and humates. And Plancher, right? Yeah. I don't remember what I did. That's why it's written down. We'd follow up we do it every week as a keep things growing. But every time there was a stress event, we would also follow it up. The idea being is, you put down a chemical, you're probably affecting that the phylosphere as well as your rhizosphere. But this specifically is working on the phylosphere. The Micro 5000 is meant to basically cover your leaves and make it a hopefully unhospitable area for things that you don't want. All powdery mildew, all different things. It was actually, one of the things that we did do, which was really crazy, is we had powdery mildew on phlox, and phlox are really susceptible to it. It was that year that was so wet. Not surprising. And basically, I went through with, I think it was a quadruple rate of Micro 5000, and it knocked it way back. Not labeled for that. You're not supposed to do that. My thought is it's biology. Biology's everywhere. Powdery mildew is biology, right? Just not the one I want. So I hit it hard with Micro 5000, and I was amazed how far it got knocked back. It didn't cure it. We ended up having to mow it as well to open up the airspace. But it was just, think outside the box. Think off the label. Then we'd be applying that, the fish and seaweed. We were adding different, calciums and a number of things to help with your micronutrients and your microminerals. Some things like sulfur that would help not as a fungicide, but being incorporated into your plant to make them more fungally resistant. So that brings me into the next. So all the tiny products we ended up using. I gotta remember there's a camera over here, sorry. The Micro 5000s, I'm a pretty big proponent for things like K&F, just because they're naturally occurring. These guys, for one, you don't know if they're going to live. For two, of course, there's also the thought of bringing foreign biology in. Bittersweet, think of that, I don't know exactly how this may really interact. I think to me, I still feel it's better than chemicals. But this gives me an idea, they engineer, for better or for worse, all this stuff, phosphorus solubilizing bacteria. This guy's for drought stress. This guy's for nitrogen fixation. This guy's just a all-purpose root inoculant here. Yeah. 10 minutes? Okay. So that's cool stuff as far as biology. Into I only have 10 minutes, we'll work. The fish, humates. One thing that you guys, if you're not using humates, try humates. In our greenhouse, we started mixing humates in with it was a chemical fertilizer, a soluble fertilizer, and they kept the same rate of fertilizer, and they were applying it. Plants were growing awesome, too awesome. They actually ended up doubling their workload because they had to prune these plants so often. They literally cut their fertilization in half. This is cheaper than fertilizer. So I would recommend humates. If you have chlorinated water, humates will help buffer that. It just buffers a ton of things. They had an issue with pH in their water. It was way too low. That's an acid, but it actually helps buffer your pH. It actually brought it up most of the point, which I guess I still don't quite understand the chemistry of that, but it did. I should probably just push on through. Part of the transition year are these tools. This probably would be easier if it was a shovel, but this was easy to carry. Check what your soil is, check your roots. I guess I should roll that up for the camera, although it may look crazy. Checking your roots, checking your mycorrhizae, like the pictures that I showed. Just checking compaction. If you if you got one of these guys sticking them in, if it's, okay, there's an issue. And sometimes some form of tillage may be the answer. There may be ways to do it with biology, with plants. Sometimes some form of tillage will speed that effort up. But checking, a lot of people don't look. A lot of people don't smell your soil. Taste it, actually, if you didn't just spray something. Some of the stuff actually tastes kind of bad. But at any rate, look, smell, touch, listen, as far as that goes. I don't know. I don't know if people spiritual or what you are, but sometimes just sitting in the field, you kind of get an idea of what's going on without looking for bugs, without looking for anything else. Everybody know what these guys are? Basically, just a magnifying glass, but they're fancy. Some might have a light. Look for bugs. What is your acceptable level of loss? What's your acceptable level of bugs? What are you comfortable with? And that's part of your transition year, is figuring that out. It's scary. When you go from a background of, a good bug is a dead bug. You should be part of an ecosystem as far as I'm concerned. I think we might have missed one of the pictures because I didn't put it in. We had banker plants, Sweet Alyssum, to harbor beneficials. We inoculated them with parasitic wasps for thrips that was our main issue in, sorry, my throat's getting dry. Our main issue in daylilies was thrips. We inoculated. Even before we were doing this transition to regenerative agriculture, we were doing that to show, kind of how ahead I feel the owners were, and why it also made it easier for me to get them to transition to more biology. They were planting different kinds of grass. I can't remember what for aphids, basically for parasite for aphids. So there's a lot of things you can do. You got to know what your problem is, basically how you're out of sync with the ecosystem, and then you got to research. Bringing up bricks. Anybody do bricks? Anybody grow marijuana? No, I was going to say grow marijuana, but I don't actually. Anybody use one of these guys before? Yep. You use it for plants, or what do you use it for?
We use it to test vegetables, but I got a pretty cheap one, and I wonder, how would you get the liquid out of the leaves? Did you grind them up or what?
There's all sorts of devices. Garlic press is what I usually use. Sometimes some leaves really don't work well, and they do make this fancy, looks like almost like an apple, one of the old school cider presses, but it's smaller. Some things you might need that for, but yeah, you're squeezing out a drop, same deal. And this chart kind of gives you an idea of what bricks you start dropping off different insects. Keeping in mind that a plant, you can test the bricks over here. The bricks may be different over here. It could be some sort of a wound. There could be all sorts of stuff happening. So, you test this plant here, said, well, there shouldn't be aphids, but there's aphids on this branch. There's a lot of stuff going on. You've got to remember this is a whole system. It's complex, I think is a better word for it. It's not complicated so much. Everything fits, but it's complex. You can't look at it like this one thing's happening. This is all happening. So refractometer was a pretty cool tool to use to kind of get an idea. Using this chart to give you an idea of what insect and disease. Tom Dykstra is the gentleman that formulated this. He's out of Florida. Look up any of his talks. If you're a nerd, they're really fascinating because some stuff gets kind of technical, but it is awesome stuff. What he's doing, and will revolutionize how we handle quote unquote pests. But this is just the tip of the iceberg. What else? Oh, the other thing that I use the refractometer for is you could check bricks on something, whatever. Daylilies. I'm spraying, my fertilizer, the Micro 5000 and the Plancher and whatever. Check it before, wait a few hours, check it again. You should see an increase in bricks. If you don't, you may not be applying what the plant needs or what the system needs.
Brix is measuring sugar, basically. It's assuming that goodness is correlated with sugar. Is that right?
Sugars and whatever's dissolved.
Are some refractometers better than others?
I'm sure there are. This is Amazon $20 refractometer. It works. I don't know. I'll probably break it, so I don't want to spend that much money on it. Just simple things. The refractometer, the shovel, checking for bugs. My simple penetrometer I forgot to bring. Everybody see the little flags with the wire? Stick it in the ground. If it's a pain to stick in, well, your soil's too solid. If you can slip it right in, okay, we're doing something here. They talk about, from the Midwest pre-Green Revolution, to stick your hand into the soil up to your elbow. Anybody do that on their farm? Wish I could. The other thing is your phone. There are apps for that. There are different, like picture this identification apps that will help you figure out what weed you have. And what I do is that I look at what weeds I have, and then I research them. Bacterial, fungal, water, kind of gives you an idea what's happening. If it's like something that's really water loving, well, crap, I guess I'm, the soil isn't raining, or maybe I'm irrigating too much, or, then you got to look. The other one is Canopio, which is kind of cool if you're doing more like range, because you take a picture of like, okay, take a picture of this, and it gives you how much coverage you have, as far as plant matter. And that's pretty neat. I should have written that down. I don't think if there's any other apps. I think I'm just about out of time, so let me see. Oh, I guess one big thing that I should bring up is money. Everybody is probably trying to make money. Maybe not. I don't know what you're here for. But as far as money, this season that I was growing and I transitioned, we actually went from about 30 acres to 40 acres, which is that's a big jump. We spent about the same amount of time weeding, cultivating. Okay, we weren't doing a lot of cultivating previous, so cultivating took up more time. But the big thing that changed money-wise was we went from, use round numbers, I don't remember them exactly, like $50,000 worth of inputs between chemicals and fertilizers. And then we went with chemicals, we're about $30,000, 30-ish. We reduced that by 2/3. What does that come out? 10 grand or so in one season. We spent a lot of that money on biologicals, but I think, some of the pictures show the root mat. We were selling roots. Those are roots, so the roots I think we're getting bigger. I think the pictures show that. But also we spent that same amount, roughly that 50 grand on inputs between chemicals, fertilizers. We were growing another 10 acres. So we didn't change our budget and we're growing another 10 acres. Is that a third more? I went to college, but was not for math. I actually went to college for animal science, which is not as far removed from plant. Well, it's all the same. What's in a cow's gut is in your soil, and vice versa. So it's the same. I had a ton of stuff I didn't make it to, but I think I'm out of time.
Q&A?
Yeah, definitely.
Questions, and if you don't mind repeating them back into
Sure. Yeah. Hi.
What year did you transitioned everything all at once?
Yes.
And what year
Oh.
was that?
So the question was transitioning everything. We transitioned it all in 1 year, and that was 2020, 2021. For the greenhouse, it was like 2020, the end of it, to 2021. Right. And I don't know if you remember 2021, it was wet. And we didn't, my bragging is we didn't use any fungicide until the fall when we started.
Did you consider doing a test plot or test area and not do the whole thing?
Yes.
And why'd you back out of that?
Mostly the time and the labor, and at that point in time, I guess I was probably a little impatient to go. I was a little bit chopping at the bit, I guess. I fully believed it would work. I was also petrified because if it didn't work, but I fully believed it would work. I guess sometimes you got to go with your gut on things.
And one last question, thank you. Obviously you test the soil and all. Did you test the organic matter to see if that was increasing as you were changing the methods? It's only been 2 seasons.
Right. I don't know if they've tested it since.
You know what it was?
I know previous, many of the soils were 1% or below. I know historically when, they've been growing in some of the same fields for about 30 years now. Historically, they were 5% and more. The hurricane kind of blasted some of the fields, but, a lot of the fields were being mined, not to be too mean, but it was great because I worked with a fellow that basically had been there since the beginning. A Vietnamese guy, he was awesome. He was full of energy. He's 60, I think that's 60 or 61, but he was just full of energy and not, from Vietnam originally, was there during Vietnam War, fled, it was a crazy story. Happiest guy you could ever imagine for having been through all that ordeal, but he remembered all this stuff. And it's great. He could tell me like, this field does this. And I remember when the instability looked like this. And I was like, it's like, well, why aren't they like that anymore? And that was part of like, what's going on, So that, that was a great thing. Having mentors and having resources like that was really good. Yeah.
talk more about any organizations or other resources in your area that supported as you went through this process?
Let's see. So Zoom, of course, has opened up a lot of stuff because the fellows from Tiny were on the left coast. So, that opened up a lot of resources. Locally, ML Altabelli was very, very important in this transition. I don't know if anyone knows ML. She's Westminster, Gardner. She owns the Good Earth now. I've known ML for a long time, 20, 30 years. So she was instrumental in it. It was good having somebody that was confident in it and be able to back me up. Locally, which again was on Zoom, was the NOFA min-till call. They call it something different now. What do we call it now? Anybody know? Anybody? I always call it the min-till call, but that's what it started as. now it's something biological growing or something. It's posted on their website. They have the Go Nuts 1 week, 1 month with, talking about, agroforestry, and then the other month they have biological growing or whatever it's called now. Look at NOFA. I'm not organic. I probably never will be, but the tenants are important. I never talked about the tenets of regenerative agriculture, keeping your soil covered, animal integration, yada, yada. But that's all accessible. It's all YouTube videos, finding reliable sources. But locally, I think NOFA's about it. I don't know. I can't think of any other. There are other organizations, but NOFA's kind of got the most going on. Dr. Rubin.
Have you considered using biochar? I was looking at that.
Yes,
sand grass.
I want to use
Cut that.
biochar like there's no tomorrow, but
Yeah.
I actually try to pitch. There's a fellow on the Cape that builds a biochar incinerator that he uses to heat a greenhouse. It's crazy. He's got two or three of them lined up, so you always have burns going. But anyway, biochar is awesome. It's crazy stuff. Terra preta, you can go on and on about that. But unless you make it yourself, it's kind of expensive, and you need of course, use it correctly. Put biochar down straight, you're going to be really hurting. You need to inoculate it and so on. So buying inoculated biochar is kind of cost prohibitive. I think there may be biochar in the Pro Start, but it's probably not enough to really. You're not making terra preta with it. But yeah, biochar is really cool stuff.
I think that about wraps up our time. I'm going to go ahead and sign off on the virtual component, but let's give Carl a big old round of applause. I know we can go on talking forever. One last question.
Mm-hmm.
We want to get in contact with you, learn more from
I've got
you.
business cards because I figured somebody would ask.
Awesome.
So everybody wants a business card. Your texting is better or email. I have 5 kids, so calling sometimes doesn't work out because it can be loud.
Awesome. And I dropped some links in the chat if anyone wants to go to the virtual silent auction or submit a session evaluation form. I know that doesn't do us any good here because we're in person. Thank you all.